The alarm systems across the Galactic Council headquarters began blaring at exactly 3 in the morning, station time. Council members from dozens of different worlds scrambled out of their sleeping quarters, confused and frightened. Nothing like this had ever happened before. The emergency broadcast system was supposed to be used only for the most terrible situations, and it had been silent for over 200 years. Ambassador Kelrin of the Velactan people appeared on every screen throughout the station. His face, normally a calm blue color, had turned almost white with fear. His hands were shaking as he tried to speak. Behind him, people were screaming. Explosions could be heard in the distance. Smoke filled the air around him. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need help immediately. Our world is under attack. They came from nowhere. We had no warning. Our defense fleet is gone. They destroyed everything in less than an hour. These creatures, they're not like anything we've ever seen. They're eating everything. The cities, the forests, even the oceans. Millions of my people are already dead. The transmission cut out for a moment. When it came back, Kelrin was running. The camera shook wildly. Behind him, something massive and dark moved through the burning buildings. It looked alive but wrong, like flesh and metal had been merged together into something that shouldn't exist. They call themselves the Kresh. They don't want to talk. They don't want our surrender. They just want to consume us. Please, someone help us. We're begging you. The transmission ended. The council chamber fell into chaos. Representatives started shouting at each other in dozens of different languages. The translation system struggled to keep up with everyone talking at once. High Chancellor Morn, the leader of the Galactic Council, called for silence. He was old, even by his species' long standards. He had seen many crises in his 300 years of service, but nothing had prepared him for this. The Velactan were peaceful people. They had no enemies. They contributed medicine and art to the entire galaxy. Why would anyone attack them? "We need to send our fleets immediately," said Commander Vex of the Torjan military. He was a warrior, bred for combat, and he understood the urgency. "Every minute we waste, more Velactan die." "Our fleets are scattered across 50 systems," replied Defense Minister Cora. She pulled up tactical displays showing the locations of all Council military vessels. It would take us at least 2 weeks to gather enough ships for a proper response. By then, the Velactan homeworld might be completely lost. 2 weeks? Vex slammed his fist on the table. That's unacceptable. We're supposed to protect our member worlds. Chancellor Morn looked at the data. His heart sank. The minister was right. The Council's military forces were designed for peacekeeping, not rapid deployment. Their ships were powerful but slow. They relied on diplomatic solutions and economic pressure to solve problems. They had forgotten how to wage real war because they hadn't needed to for generations. "There might be one option," said Ambassador Lyra. She was young for a council representative, and she came from a world near Earth. "We could ask the humans." The entire chamber went silent. Every representative turned to look at her. Some faces showed hope. Most showed fear. "Absolutely not," said Minister Cora. "The humans are dangerous. We restricted their military expansion for good reason. Their homeworld is a Class 12 death world. Do you understand what that means? Only the most violent, adaptable, and aggressive species can evolve on such hostile planets. They've been in space for barely 20 years, and they've already built more warships than most civilizations build in a century. They've also never broken any of our treaties," Lyra argued. "Yes, they're aggressive. Yes, they come from a violent world. But they've been good neighbors. They trade fairly, they respect our laws, and most importantly, they have ships positioned near the Velactan system right now. They could be there in hours, not weeks." Commander Vex looked at the tactical map. The human patrol routes were marked in red, a warning color that indicated potential threat. But Lyra was right. 3 human vessels were conducting standard patrol operations just 2 jumps away from the Velactan homeworld. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it now. Every second counts." Chancellor Morn felt the weight of the decision crushing down on him. The humans terrified most of the council. They had evolved on Earth, a world where everything tried to kill everything else. The weather could change from freezing cold to burning heat. Earthquakes destroyed entire regions without warning. Even the plants and animals were deadly. Humans had survived by becoming the most dangerous predators on their planet, and then they had turned that aggression on each other for thousands of years. When humans had finally reached space and made contact with the Galactic Council, everyone had been shocked. Most Deathworld species never made it past their industrial age. They usually destroyed themselves in nuclear wars or environmental collapse. Humans had come close several times, but somehow pulled back from the edge each time. The Council had welcomed humanity, but with severe restrictions. Human military vessels were limited in number and weapon systems. Humans could defend their own worlds, but were forbidden from expanding their navy beyond a certain size. Everyone understood why. If humans ever decided to go to war against the Council, it would be devastating. Better to keep them contained, controlled, and happy with trade and cultural exchange. But now, those same dangerous humans were the only ones who could help in time. Send the message, Chancellor Morn finally said. Ask the humans if they will assist. Make it clear this is a request, not an order, and pray to whatever gods you believe in that we're making the right choice. The transmission was sent to Earth Defense Command. It reached Admiral Patricia Cole while she was reviewing supply reports in her office overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. She had been in the military for 30 years, had fought in 3 wars, and had lost people she loved to violence. She knew what it meant to ask for help, and she knew what it meant to give it. The message played on her screen. Chancellor Morn's face appeared, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. Admiral Cole, the Galactic Council formally requests assistance from Earth's military forces. The Valactan homeworld is under attack by an enemy called the Kresh. Our own forces cannot respond in time. We estimate that without immediate intervention, the Valactan species will be extinct within 72 hours. We understand this is highly irregular given the restrictions placed on your military, but we have no other options. Will humanity help us? Cole sat back in her chair. She thought about all the times the Council had voted to limit human expansion. All the times they had treated Earth like a dangerous animal that needed to be caged. All the warnings they had given about human violence and aggression. Now they were asking humans to unleash exactly what they feared most. She also thought about 3 billion Valactan people who were dying while politicians argued about rules and treaties. She thought about what it meant to have power and choose not to use it when innocents were suffering. She thought about the kind of galaxy she wanted to live in, where people helped each other regardless of old fears and prejudices. Admiral Cole opened a secure channel to every human military installation in known space. Her voice was calm and clear as she spoke. This is Admiral Patricia Cole. Authorization code Delta 779er. Execute Protocol 7 immediately. Recall all fleets to staging areas. Prepare for combat operations. We have civilians who need defending, and we're going to show the galaxy what humans do best. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. Across dozens of star systems, human ships began changing course. Crews rushed to battle stations. Weapon systems came online. Supply ships loaded ammunition and fuel. Within 1 hour, the largest human military force ever assembled was forming up and preparing to jump to the Valactan system. The galaxy had asked the Deathworlders for help. Now they were about to see what that really meant. Captain Ryan Blake was sleeping when the alert came through. The sound was different from normal alarms. This was the one they had trained for but never expected to actually hear. Protocol 7 meant war, real war, not exercises or patrols or showing the flag at distant stations. Actual combat against an actual enemy. He was dressed and on the bridge of the UHS Retribution within 3 minutes. His crew was already at their stations, running through pre-combat checks with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Chris Sanders looked up from the tactical display. Captain, we've received confirmation. The Valactan homeworld is under attack. We're being recalled to Rally Point Theta, along with every other ship in the fleet. Blake studied the information on his screen. The Kresh. He had never heard of them before, but the preliminary intelligence was terrifying. They were organic ships, living creatures the size of buildings that flew through space and consumed everything they touched. They had appeared from dark space, the regions beyond mapped territory, and fallen on the Valactan like locusts on crops. How long until we can jump? Blake asked. Engineering says 4 hours to prep the slipspace drive, sir, replied Ensign Danny Price from the engineering station. We've been on low power mode during patrol. They need time to bring the reactors to full combat capacity. Tell them they have 2 hours, Blake said firmly. People are dying. We don't have time for everything to be perfect. We need to be good enough, fast enough. Across human space, similar scenes played out on hundreds of ships. Captains cut their shore leave short. Crews rushed back from stations. Supply officers worked around the clock to load everything their ships might need. The human military machine, kept deliberately small by treaty, was waking up and showing what it could really do when necessary. Commander Nina Foster stood in the hangar bay of her destroyer, the UHS Relentless, watching as fighters were loaded and armed. She had 24 pilots under her command, men and women who flew the small, fast attack craft that would screen the larger ships. Her lead pilot, Lieutenant Sophie Grant, approached with a tablet showing the mission briefing. "Commander, we're looking at fighting in close orbit around a populated planet," Sophie said, her voice tight with concern. "If we miss our targets or if debris falls, we could kill the very people we're trying to save." Nina understood the worry. Space combat near planets was dangerous for everyone involved, but they didn't have a choice. "Then we don't miss. We train harder than anyone else for exactly this reason. Our weapons are precise. Our pilots are the best. We're going to go in there and we're going to save those people. Understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Sophie replied, standing straighter. "My squadron will be ready." At Rally Point Theta, Admiral Patricia Cole watched her tactical display as ships began arriving. They came in groups, whole squadrons jumping in together, followed by individual vessels that had been too far away to group up. Within 6 hours, she had 200 ships assembled. Within 12 hours, that number grew to 300. The fleet was impressive. Heavy cruisers like the Retribution formed the core, their armor thick enough to take tremendous punishment, while their railguns could punch through almost anything. Destroyers like the Relentless provided speed and flexibility, able to respond quickly to threats and protect the larger ships. Frigates and corvettes swarmed around the bigger vessels like guard dogs, small enough to be hard to hit but carrying enough firepower to hurt anything that got too close. Cole's flagship, the UHS Defiance, was the largest ship in the fleet. It was a dreadnought, a ship designed for one purpose: to stand against impossible odds and win. Its armor was layered composite materials that could absorb energy weapons and deflect kinetic impacts. Its weapons could engage targets across millions of kilometers with devastating accuracy. But what made the human fleet truly dangerous wasn't just the ships. It was the people who crewed them. Lieutenant Kyle Murphy sat in his gunnery station aboard the Relentless, trying to keep his hands from shaking. This was his first deployment, his first real mission. He had trained for 3 years, scored top marks in every simulation, but this was different. This was real. Real enemies. Real consequences. Real death. Sergeant Greg Palmer, the senior gunnery officer, noticed the young man's nervousness. He had been in combat before, had seen friends die, had learned the hard way that fear was normal and useful if you controlled it. He moved to sit next to Murphy. "You scared, kid?" Greg asked quietly. Kyle nodded, not trusting his voice. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Fear keeps you alive. The day you stop being scared is the day you make stupid mistakes." Greg tapped the control panel in front of them. "You know this system better than anyone. You can hit a target the size of a baseball from 200 kilometers away. Trust your training. Trust your crew. And remember why we're doing this. To save the Galactic," Kyle said. "That's right. We're not invaders. We're not conquerors. We're the people who show up when monsters need killing. That's who we are. That's who we've always been." Across the fleet, similar conversations happened. Veterans calmed nervous rookies. Engineers triple-checked systems. Medical teams prepared for casualties. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone understood the risk. But nobody suggested turning back. Admiral Cole stood alone in her ready room, looking at the casualty projections. The tactical computer had run the numbers based on what little they knew about the crash. Best case scenario, they would lose 20 ships and 2,000 personnel. Worst case, they could lose half the fleet. She thought about every person under her command, every life that depended on the orders she was about to give. Her executive officer, Commander Jack Allen, entered without knocking. He had served with her for 15 years and could read her moods better than anyone. "They're ready, Admiral. All ships report combat capable and awaiting your orders." "Jack, am I doing the right thing?" she asked. "We're taking our people into a fight that isn't ours against an enemy we don't understand, to save aliens that most humans have never met." Jack was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer. "Admiral, my daughter is 7 years old. Yesterday she asked me why I was leaving. I told her that some people far away needed help and I was going to help them. She said that sounded like what heroes do in stories. I told her it wasn't about being a hero. It was about doing what's right even when it's hard." He moved to stand beside her at the window, looking out at the assembled fleet. "Those ships out there, Those 300 vessels filled with volunteers who all chose to be here. They understand something important. We're not just fighting for the Galactic. We're fighting for the kind of galaxy we want to live in, one where the strong protect the weak, where people help each other, where species work together instead of turning away when things get difficult. Cole felt the weight lift slightly. Jack was right. This was about more than just one battle or one species. This was about who humanity chose to be now that they had the power to make a difference. She walked onto the bridge of the Defiance. Every officer stood at attention. The crew looked to her, waiting for the orders that would send them into battle. Cole moved to her command chair and sat down. She opened a channel to every ship in the fleet. 300 captains and 90,000 crew members heard her voice at the same moment. All ships, this is Admiral Cole. I'm not going to lie to you about what we're flying into. The Kresh outnumber us 3-1. They've already destroyed the Galactic defense fleet. Every tactical analysis says this is a suicide mission. The Galactic Council thinks we're probably going to fail. She paused, letting that sink in. But here's what they don't understand about us. We're humans. We come from Earth, a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived ice ages that buried continents. We survived predators that saw us as food. We survived diseases that killed millions. We survived because we're too stubborn to quit and too mean to die easily. She could hear the mood shifting across the fleet. Nervousness turning to determination. Fear becoming resolve. The Kresh think they're the apex predators of this galaxy. They're about to learn they're wrong. We're going to jump into that system, we're going to kill every last one of those things, and we're going to save every Galactic we can. Not because it's easy, not because it's safe, but because it's right and because we're the only ones who can. Cole stood up from her chair. All ships form up. Navigation, plot jump coordinates for the Galactic system. Communications. Broadcast our approach to any Kresh in range. Let them know we're coming. Admiral, what should the message say? Asked the communications officer. Cole smiled coldly. Tell them that Earth sends its regards. All ships jump on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. Space tore open as 300 human warships entered slipspace simultaneously. They were heading toward a battle that would change the galaxy forever. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that its children were about to remind the universe why Deathworld species were feared. The fleet emerged from slipspace at the edge of the Galactic system. Ahead of them, orbital stations burned. Ships floated dead in space, and surrounding the blue-green planet were thousands of Kresh vessels, organic nightmares that pulsed with stolen life. Admiral Cole's voice came across all channels one last time. The first thing that struck everyone was the smell. Even through sealed ships and filtered air systems, somehow the sensors detected it. The Kresh vessels were organic, living things made of flesh and bone and something else that didn't belong in nature. They pulsed with sickly green light, and their hulls were covered in what looked like tumors and veins. The largest ones were the size of cities, drifting through space like bloated corpses. Captain Ryan Blake stared at the tactical display aboard the Retribution. Red dots filled the screen. Thousands of them. The Kresh swarm surrounded the Galactic planet like insects around rotting meat. Already parts of the world below were dark. Cities that should have been lit up were gone, consumed by the creatures that had descended from orbit. All weapons, prepare to fire on my command, Blake ordered. His voice was steady despite the fear trying to crawl up his throat. Target the largest vessels first. Those are the processing ships. They're where the Kresh turn everything they consume into more of themselves. Lieutenant Chris Sanders worked his console, designating targets for every weapon system on the ship. Captain, I'm reading massive energy signatures from the Kresh fleet. They know we're here. Good, Blake said. Let them come to us. All ships maintain formation. Wait for the Admiral's signal. Aboard the UHS Relentless, Commander Nina Foster watched her fighter pilots launch into space. 24 small craft separated from the destroyer, forming up in perfect formation. Lieutenant Sophie Grant led her squadron toward the Kresh fleet, her fighters' engines burning bright in the darkness. Stay tight, people, Sophie called over the squadron channel. We're going to hit them fast and pull back before they can swarm us. Remember your training. Don't be heroes. Do your job and come home. The fighter next to her was piloted by Ensign Kyle Murphy. He had been transferred to fighter duty just 3 months ago and was still learning. His hands gripped the controls too tightly. His breathing was too fast. Sophie could hear it over the comm. Murphy, slow your breathing down, she said calmly. You're going to hyperventilate. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Just like in training. Yes, ma'am, Kyle replied, his voice shaking slightly. I'm okay. I can do this. I know you can. Just follow my lead and you'll be fine. Admiral Cole watched the entire battlefield from the bridge of the Defiance. The tactical display showed her everything. The human fleet was outnumbered badly, but they had advantages the Kresh didn't expect. Human ships were built for war. Every system, every weapon, every piece of armor was designed with one purpose in mind: to destroy the enemy before they destroyed you. All ships advance, Cole commanded. Execute attack pattern Delta, heavy ships to the center. Destroyers on the flanks, fighters provide screening. Engage at will. The human fleet moved forward as one massive unit. The Kresh responded by sending hundreds of their smaller vessels toward the advancing ships. These were fighter-sized creatures, living things with wings made of bone and skin stretched between them. They moved fast, darting through space in ways that shouldn't have been possible without air. The two forces met in a blaze of weapons fire. Human railguns spoke first, magnetic accelerators hurling metal slugs at incredible speeds. The rounds tore through Kresh vessels, punching holes in organic armor and spraying biological matter into space. Missiles followed, conventional warheads and nuclear weapons both, painting the void with brief stars of destruction. The Kresh fought back with weapons that were equally terrible. They fired projectiles made of compressed bone that could punch through metal armor. They sprayed acid that ate through hull plating. Some of the larger vessels released clouds of smaller organisms that swarmed over human ships, trying to find weak points to exploit. Captain Blake stood firm as the Retribution took its first hits. The ship shuddered under the impact. Alarms blared. Damage reports came in from multiple decks, but the thick armor held and the crew kept fighting. Return fire all batteries, Blake ordered. Target that large vessel at bearing 275. The Retribution's main guns fired, 8 massive railguns launching their deadly cargo. The targeted Kresh ship, one of the bloated processing vessels, took the hits across its entire length. The creature screamed, a sound that somehow transmitted through the vacuum of space and made everyone who heard it feel sick. It began to break apart, pieces of it spinning away into the darkness. Direct hit, Captain, Sanders reported. Target destroyed. Moving to next priority target. Sophie Grant led her fighter squadron through the chaos, dodging between larger ships and engaging the Kresh fighters that swarmed everywhere. Her targeting computer locked onto one of the creatures. She fired her autocannons, the bullets tearing into the organic vessel. It died thrashing, its wings going limp as it drifted away. 2 on your 6, Grant, called another pilot. Break left, now. Sophie threw her fighter into a hard turn, feeling the G-forces press her into her seat despite the inertial dampeners. 2 Kresh fighters followed her, firing their bone projectiles. One missed. The other clipped her wing, tearing through the armor plating but not breaching the hull. Kyle Murphy dove in from above, his guns blazing. He caught one of the Kresh fighters in his crosshairs and fired. The creature exploded, torn apart by the sustained fire. The second one tried to turn toward this new threat, but Sophie had already recovered. She came up behind it and finished it with a missile strike. Good shooting, Murphy, Sophie said. You saved my life. Just doing my job, ma'am. Kyle replied, but there was pride in his voice. The fear was still there, but he was learning to push through it. The battle raged for hours. The Kresh tried to overwhelm the human ships with numbers, sending wave after wave of fighters and smaller vessels. But the humans fought with a coordination and discipline that the Kresh couldn't match. Each ship knew exactly where every other ship was. They covered each other's weak points. They focused fire on priority targets. They made every shot count, but the cost was terrible. The frigate UHS Guardian took heavy damage when it was swarmed by dozens of Kresh fighters. The creatures latched onto the hull and began boring through with their acid weapons. Captain Paul Chen made the hardest decision of his life. He ordered emergency separation of the affected sections, blowing explosive bolts and jettisoning entire decks along with the attached Kresh. 70 people died in those sections, but it saved the other 300 crew members. The destroyer UHS Valiant lost its main reactor when a Kresh projectile penetrated deep into the engineering section. Lieutenant Amy Chen stayed at her post, manually shutting down the reactor to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The radiation exposure would have killed her in minutes, but the emergency containment fields held just long enough. They pulled her out barely alive, her body ravaged by radiation poisoning. Admiral Cole watched the casualty reports coming in and felt each loss like a physical blow. But she couldn't stop now. Couldn't hesitate. The Kresh were breaking. Their coordination was failing as the humans systematically destroyed their command vessels. The processing ships, the ones that turned consumed matter into new Kresh, were priority targets. Everyone destroyed meant the enemy couldn't replace their losses. All ships focus fire on the remaining processing vessels, Cole ordered. I want them dead now. The human fleet concentrated its fire. Dozens of ships turned their weapons on the largest Kresh vessels. The creatures tried to retreat, tried to escape, but they were too slow and too big. One by one they died, their deaths echoing across space in silent screams. Commander Nina Foster watched from the Relentless as the last processing ship exploded, torn apart by concentrated railgun fire. Without those vessels, the Kresh couldn't sustain themselves. They needed to constantly consume and process matter to survive. Cut off from their resource supply, they would starve. Captain Blake, this is Foster, she transmitted to the Retribution. The Kresh fleet is breaking formation. They're trying to retreat. Blake looked at his tactical display. It was true. The Kresh vessels were pulling back, abandoning the planet they had been consuming. But they weren't beaten yet. There were still thousands of them, and they could regroup and attack somewhere else. Admiral, requesting permission to pursue. Blake called to the Defiance. Cole considered for only a moment. Negative, Captain. Let them run. Our priority is securing the planet and helping survivors. We've hurt them badly. They won't be coming back here anytime soon. As the Kresh fled into dark space, the human fleet took stock of its losses. 12 ships destroyed completely. Another 20 damaged badly enough that they would need major repairs. Over 800 people dead. 2,000 wounded. The price had been high, but they had won. Below them, on the surface of the Valactan homeworld, 3 billion survivors looked up at their sky. For the first time in 3 days, the Kresh were gone. The nightmare was over. And orbiting above them was a fleet of strange ships from Earth, crewed by the species everyone had been afraid of. The species that had just saved their entire civilization. Captain Blake sat back in his command chair, exhausted beyond measure. Around him, his crew celebrated quietly, too tired for anything more. They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had faced down an enemy that had terrified the entire galaxy, and they had won. 3 weeks after the battle, Admiral Patricia Cole stood before the full assembly of the Galactic Council. The chamber was massive, designed to hold representatives from 47 different species. Every seat was filled. Every eye was on her. The air felt thick with tension and unspoken fear. She wore her dress uniform, the dark blue fabric crisp and clean. On her chest were medals from 3 different wars, conflicts that had happened on Earth before humanity had ever reached the stars. Next to her stood Captain Ryan Blake and Commander Nina Foster, both looking equally uncomfortable in their formal uniforms. They were warriors, not politicians, and this felt more dangerous than facing the Kresh. High Chancellor Morn called the session to order. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. We gather today to discuss the actions taken by the human military forces during the Valactan crisis. While we acknowledge that their intervention saved millions of lives, there are serious concerns about the methods employed. A holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber, showing footage from the battle. Human ships firing nuclear weapons, railguns tearing through Kresh vessels with devastating effect, fighter craft engaging in close combat that looked more like butchery than warfare. The images were brutal and hard to watch. Defense Minister Cora spoke first. She was a tall, thin being from a world where violence had been eliminated through genetic modification thousands of years ago. Admiral Cole, your forces used weapons that have been banned by council law for over 300 years. Nuclear devices, kinetic kill weapons, chemical explosives. These are instruments of mass destruction, not precision defense tools. Cole met her gaze without flinching. Minister, with respect, the Kresh don't care about council laws. They don't negotiate. They don't surrender. They consume everything in their path. Every minute we spent following conventional tactics would have cost Valactan lives. We use the tools necessary to win quickly and decisively. But at what cost to galactic peace? Another representative asked. This one was from the Zentari Confederation, a group of worlds known for their philosophical approach to conflict resolution. You've demonstrated a capacity for violence that frankly terrifies most species in this chamber. How do we know you won't turn those same weapons against us one day? Blake stepped forward before Cole could respond. His jaw was tight with anger. Because we're not monsters. We're soldiers. We follow orders. We protect people. 3 billion Velactin are alive today because we were willing to do what needed to be done. If that scares you, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize for saving lives. The chamber erupted in argument. Some representatives shouted support for the humans. Others demanded restrictions, sanctions, or even expulsion from the council. The noise grew louder and more chaotic until Chancellor Morn called for silence. Before he could speak, another voice rang out. Junior Ambassador Perrin of the Velactin stood from his seat. He was young for a council member, barely 30 years old by his species standards. He had been off-world when the Kresh attacked, the only member of his family to survive. With permission, Chancellor, I wish to speak, Perrin said, his voice shaking with emotion. Morn nodded. The floor recognizes Ambassador Perrin. Perrin walked to the center of the chamber, standing next to the humans. He looked around at all the representatives, his blue skin pale with grief. I want to tell you what I saw when I returned to my homeworld. I saw cities that had been consumed down to bedrock. I saw forests that had been stripped of every living thing. I saw oceans that had been drained dry. The Kresh took everything. They would have taken all of us if they had been given more time. He turned to face Cole directly. Admiral Cole, your ships arrived when we had maybe 12 hours left. 12 hours before my entire species ceased to exist. Your people fought for 3 days straight. I watched recordings of the battle. I saw your ships take damage to protect our orbital stations. I saw your fighters put themselves between Kresh vessels and our cities. I counted 843 humans who died saving people they had never met. Perrin's voice grew stronger. So when you ask if we should fear these humans, my answer is no. We should thank them. We should honor them. We should recognize that they possess something most of us have forgotten, the willingness to fight, truly fight, when innocent lives are at stake. The chamber fell silent. Perrin returned to his seat and Chancellor Morn looked thoughtful. The council will take a short recess to consider what we've heard. Admiral Cole, you and your officers may wait in the preparation chamber. The 3 humans were escorted to a smaller room off the main chamber. As soon as the door closed, Blake let out a long breath. That could have gone better. It could have gone worse, Nina countered. At least Perrin spoke up for us. Without that, they might have voted to disband our fleet entirely. Cole walked to the window looking out at the city beyond. Zentara Prime was beautiful, all flowing architecture and peaceful gardens. It was a world that had never known war, never experienced real violence. She understood why they feared humanity. In their place, she might have felt the same way. Admiral, can I ask you something? Nina said quietly. Do you ever worry they might be right? That we're too dangerous? Too violent? Cole was quiet for a long moment. Every day, every time I order people into combat, every time I authorize weapons fire, I wonder if we're becoming the very thing we fight against. But then I remember why we fight. We don't conquer. We don't enslave. We don't consume. We protect. As long as we remember that, as long as we use our strength for others instead of ourselves, I think we'll be okay. The door opened and Chancellor Morn entered alone. The ancient being looked tired, older than Cole had ever seen him. He gestured for them to sit, then took a seat himself. I wanted to speak with you privately before the council reconvenes, Morn said. Admiral, may I be completely honest? Please, Cole replied, you terrify us. Your entire species terrifies us in ways we struggle to articulate. We've watched you for 20 years now, and every prediction we made about Deathworld species has been wrong. You should have destroyed yourselves in nuclear fire. You should have conquered your neighbors the moment you reached space. You should have turned into monsters, but you haven't. You've been good neighbors, fair traders, and today heroes to the Velactin people. He stood and walked to the window. The Kresh are still out there. They've attacked 4 systems in the past year alone. Our fleets can't stop them. We're too slow, too cautious, too bound by rules designed for a galaxy at peace. But that galaxy doesn't exist anymore. We need warriors now, and we don't know how to be warriors. What are you asking, Chancellor? Cole asked carefully. I'm asking if humanity would be willing to serve as the Council's rapid response force for existential threats. We would lift many of the restrictions on your military. You could build more ships, develop new weapons, train more soldiers. In exchange, when threats like the Kresh appear, you would be the ones we call. You would be our guardians, Blake spoke up. You want us to be your attack dogs? No, Morn said firmly. We want you to be our partners, our protectors. The species willing to stand between innocent people and the darkness. We're not ordering you. We're asking. And if you say no, we'll respect that decision. Cole looked at her officers, then back at the Chancellor. We need to discuss this with our government. This isn't a decision I can make alone. But I can tell you this. If people need help, if innocents are in danger, humanity will answer. We always have. It's who we are. The council reconvened an hour later. The debate lasted another 6 hours, with representatives arguing from every possible angle. Some wanted harsh restrictions on humanity. Others wanted complete integration into council military command. In the end, they reached a compromise. The restrictions on human military expansion would be partially lifted. Humanity could increase their fleet size by 50% and develop new defensive technologies without council approval. In exchange, human forces would serve as the council's emergency response for Category 5 threats, situations where entire civilizations were at risk. As Cole prepared to leave Zantara Prime, Ambassador Perrin approached her privately. He carried a small box which he offered to her with trembling hands. This belonged to my father, he said softly. He was a teacher, a peaceful man who never raised his voice in anger. The Kresh killed him while he was protecting his students. I want you to have this as a reminder that the people you save are not just numbers in a report. They're fathers and mothers, children and teachers, artists and dreamers. You gave them a future. Please never forget that. Cole opened the box. Inside was a simple pendant, a Galactic symbol that meant hope. She felt her throat tighten with emotion. Ambassador, I promise you we'll never forget, and we'll never stop fighting for people like your father. As her ship departed from orbit, Cole stood on the observation deck watching Zantara Prime shrink behind them. Nina and Blake joined her, and the three of them stood in silence for a moment. So we're officially the galaxy's guardians now, Blake said. That's a heavy responsibility. It is, Cole agreed. But I can't think of any group of people I'd rather trust with it than humans. We know the cost of violence. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Galactic. The UHS Valiant finally returned to Earth orbit after an extended patrol mission, hunting down the last scattered Kresh vessels in the outer sectors. Commander Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck window, watching his homeworld rotate slowly below. The blue oceans, the white clouds, the green and brown continents, it all looked so peaceful from up here, so far removed from the violence he had witnessed. The ship was different now. Repair crews had fixed the battle damage, but they couldn't fix the empty chairs on the bridge or the unused bunks in the crew quarters. 18 people had left Earth on the Valiant. Only 14 came back. Lieutenant Amy Chen had survived her radiation exposure, but she would never serve on a ship again. Her body had been too badly damaged. 3 others had died during a boarding action when Kresh fighters had managed to latch onto the hull. Morrison carried the weight of every name on the casualty list. He saw their faces when he closed his eyes, heard their voices in quiet moments. Command had its privileges, but it also had its costs. He was responsible for those people. He had given the orders that put them in harm's way, and no amount of reasoning could quite erase the guilt he felt. Commander, we're receiving clearance to dock at Station 7, said Lieutenant Danny Price from the communications station. The young officer had taken over Amy's duties after she was evacuated for medical treatment. He was good at his job, but he wasn't Amy. Nobody could replace her. Acknowledged, Morrison replied. Take us in nice and easy. Let's not scratch the paint after we made it this far. The crew managed weak smiles at the joke. They were tired, worn down by months of constant vigilance and the occasional skirmish with Kresh remnants, but they had done their duty. They had protected shipping lanes and civilian stations. They had saved lives. That had to count for something. Down on Earth, preparations were underway for a memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery. The cemetery had existed for hundreds of years, holding the remains of soldiers who had fought in every war humanity had ever waged. Now it had been expanded to include a new section for those who died defending not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. Admiral Patricia Cole stood in her office, reviewing the speech she would give at the ceremony. She had written and rewritten it a dozen times, but the words still felt inadequate. How could she possibly express what those 843 people meant? How could she explain their sacrifice to families who would never see their loved ones again? Her assistant knocked on the door. "Admiral, the families are beginning to arrive. The service starts in 1 hour." Cole nodded and stood, straightening her uniform. This was the hardest part of command. Not the tactical decisions or the political negotiations. This, facing the people left behind and trying to give them some measure of comfort. The memorial service was held on a cool autumn morning. Thousands of people gathered among the white headstones, each one marking a life given in service. Captain Ryan Blake stood in the crowd, his arm still in a sling from injuries that hadn't quite healed. Next to him was Ensign Kyle Murphy, who had requested permission to attend even though he hadn't lost anyone personally. He needed to be there, to honor the people who hadn't made it home. Commander Nina Foster sat near the front with the family members of her crew. Lieutenant Sophie Grant's father, Henry Grant, sat beside her. His daughter had died when her fighter's reactor went critical during the final stages of the battle. Sophie had stayed at her controls, guiding her damaged craft away from the fleet before it exploded. Her sacrifice had saved dozens of other pilots. Admiral Cole approached the podium as the crowd fell silent. She looked out at all the faces, saw the grief and the pride mixed together in equal measure. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "We gather here today to honor 843 men and women who gave everything in defense of people they had never met. These were not career soldiers chasing glory. They were ordinary people who chose to serve. Engineers and pilots, medics and gunners, young recruits and experienced veterans. Each one of them understood the risk. Each one of them went anyway." She paused, gathering her strength. "Some people have asked me if their sacrifice was worth it. If saving an alien species was worth the cost of so many human lives. My answer is always the same. These people didn't die for aliens. They died for the principle that innocent lives matter, regardless of where those lives come from. They died proving that humanity has evolved beyond tribalism, beyond seeing only our own kind as worthy of protection." Henry Grant listened to the words, tears running down his weathered face. He thought about Sophie, about the little girl who had always wanted to fly, who had looked up at the stars and dreamed of adventure. She had found her adventure, and it had cost her everything, but she had saved others in her final moments. She had mattered. Her life had meant something. After the ceremony, Morrison found himself approached by an elderly woman with kind eyes. She wore a black dress and carried a photograph of a young man in uniform. "Commander Morrison? My son was David Harper. He served on your ship." Morrison felt his chest tighten. Harper had been a good kid, barely 20 years old, working in engineering. He had died when a Kresh acid weapon breached the hull near his station. Morrison had carried his body to the medical bay himself, hoping somehow it wasn't too late. But it had been. "Mrs. Harper, I'm so sorry," Morrison said, his voice rough with emotion. "David was an excellent engineer. He saved the ship more than once with his quick thinking. If there's anything I can do..." She reached out and took his hand. "My son wrote me letters. He told me about you, about how you always checked on the crew, how you knew everyone's name. He said you were a good commander, that he trusted you. That means everything to me. It means he didn't die following someone who didn't care." Morrison couldn't find words. He just held her hand and let her talk about her son, about the boy who had loved building things and fixing broken machines. It was the least he could do. Across the cemetery, Captain Blake found Kyle Murphy standing alone near one of the headstones. It belonged to Sergeant Greg Palmer, the veteran who had helped Kyle through his first combat mission. Palmer had died 3 weeks after the Battle of Galactic when their ship was ambushed by a Kresh patrol. "He talked about you, you know," Blake said, coming to stand beside the young man. "Said you were going to be a fine officer one day. Said you had the right instincts." Kyle wiped his eyes. "I keep thinking about what he told me. About how being scared keeps you alive. About how we're not heroes, we're just people doing what needs to be done. I try to live up to that. To honor what he taught me." "That's all any of us can do," Blake replied. "We carry them with us. We remember their lessons. We try to be worthy of their sacrifice." As the sun began to set, the crowd slowly dispersed. Families returned to their homes carrying grief that would never fully heal. The officers returned to their duties carrying memories of friends lost. And the galaxy continued turning, unaware of most of the names carved into those headstones, but forever changed by what they had done. Admiral Cole returned to her office late that evening. She found a package waiting for her, delivered by diplomatic courier. Inside was a holographic data chip and a handwritten note from Ambassador Perrin. Admiral Cole, I wanted you to see what your people gave us. What their sacrifice made possible. She activated the hologram. It showed the Galactic homeworld 6 months after the battle. Cities were being rebuilt. Forests were growing back through careful cultivation. Children played in parks that had been consumed by the creche. Schools had reopened. Hospitals were treating patients. Life had returned to a world that had been on the edge of death. The hologram shifted to show a memorial on the Galactic homeworld. It was a massive structure, tall and proud, carved from native stone. On it were inscribed 843 names, every human who had died defending their world. And beneath those names, written in both English and Galactic, were simple words. They came when no one else would. They fought when all seemed lost. They gave everything so we could live. We will never forget. Cole felt tears running down her face. She thought about all those people, all those lives cut short. She thought about the families grieving tonight, the empty chairs at dinner tables, the letters that would never be written. The price of victory had been terrible. But as she looked at the images of Galactic children playing, of parents holding babies that would have never been born if the creche had won, she understood something important. The price had been high, but the cost of doing nothing would have been infinitely higher. 3 billion lives saved, an entire civilization preserved, a future that would have been erased now flourishing. The next morning, Morrison reported to Earth Defense Command for his next assignment. He found Admiral Cole waiting for him with new orders. The Valiant was being refitted and upgraded. Humanity's fleet was expanding and experienced commanders were needed. We're building 30 new ships, Cole told him. Faster, stronger, better equipped than anything we've had before. The Council has requested we establish rapid response squadrons in every major sector. I want you to command one of those squadrons.